Okay, we've got a few minutes after the hour. We've got a large group here, and I know probably more coming in still, but let's go ahead and get started because we have a lot of great things to cover, and we're excited certainly about this session. So thank you again for being here with us. I'm Brett Christie, and I am VP for Educational Innovation and Inclusivity at Alchemy. I've been in that role for 3 years, and I get to do all sorts of great stuff that involves thought leadership, content development, helping us to innovate our content and products and solutions. And so a lot of great things that I get to do that's really exciting. And it's all grounded in learning science, which has been my career for 30 years now. So love applying that in new ways and with people continually. But I'll step back because it's going to be more about our main presenters coming up here, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But first, we're going to go to a quick poll and do a pulse check about your current state of mind regarding ChatGPT. So we'll have the poll pop up, and if you could respond, and I know may not be one response that's absolutely perfect, but which is closest to your current state or sentiment toward ChatGPT in higher education. Okay, so we'll let that run for a little bit here. And is that visible to everybody? Great. And on my end, for some reason, I'm not seeing response numbers. Are you getting that, Kelly?
Yes, I am.
Great. Okay. I want to allow enough time where we feel like people have been able to respond, but I certainly don't want to drag this out too long for you folks, so we can get to the meat of the session, if you will. And what's our count now, Kelly?
We're at 207 out of 242, so 85% participation.
Great. I think, folks, we'll go ahead and close it now, and let's take a look at the results. And you could certainly share in chat if we cut you off. I would apologize for that, but feel free to share there if you'd like. So let's take a look at the results. Okay, practically half of you are excited and seeing so much potential, and you're using and learning all that you can. And it's a lot to keep up with, for sure, and it'll keep evolving, and we'll talk about that through our presenters today and through our session. 19%, you get why some are excited. You hope to get there in time. Yeah, there's a learning curve, there's a growth curve, and it's very fast paced. And maybe summer is that opportunity where you're going to brush up, and we'll talk about that. Mixed bag of pro and con. There's absolutely pro and con involved in there. So it really just depends on sometimes what your lens is for that, or how much you've informed yourself on one side of the coin versus the other. So we'll certainly talk about that. Only 2% saying that it's causing problems in terms of cheating or learning circumvention. So, wow, that's great, because you do see a lot of headlines, at least early on, where people were just totally against. This is going to just open up cheating completely. Students won't try anymore. They'll just look to circumvent. So great to see that only 2% are really on that deep skeptical or pessimistic side. Great. All right. Thank you. We'll close that poll. I've got that. And then what I want to do now is move on to introductions here. So took care of myself already. Let me introduce our speakers today. And what led me to inviting them is I've been following what they've been writing about for the last 6 months or so, where when ChatGPT came out in November, they kind of dove in right away. Of course, their current courses were ending, but they started exploring right away what ChatGPT was about, what it meant for their teaching, what it meant for their students, and working together with their students and the work that they did. And so I followed their writings, and we'll get to their blog later in the session, but was following their posts and their writings and really enjoying that. And then Zach posted recently and said, oh, if to anyone who wants to watch instead of read, here's a link to a webinar we just did recently. So I took the bait and watched that, and really enjoyed it. And I thought this would be a really cool, engaging session to offer. And we knew going into May, it's hard because a lot of people are almost in shutdown mode, but we thought, let's give it a try. And a lot of you are here today. So it worked out that there's still a lot of interest, despite the fact that you have a lot of things going on right now with finals coming up and all of that. So Zach, I've known for over 10 years, I believe now. We were both in the Cal State system together at different campuses and got to work together very closely. Zach also is part of the communications department, communication studies at Cal State Chico, one of the 23 campuses, and that's north of Sacramento a little bit for those that don't know the geography. And then Nick is in sociology at CSU Chico, and both engaging in a lot of great scholarship. And I love how they've come together on this topic and just the rhythm they have and how they work together on doing this. And you'll see that through our session today. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Zach to take control here.
Great, thanks everybody. I am going to share screen. Give me just a second.
And while he's propping that up, remember, keep sharing in chat like I see it happening, and also know that later on, we will have a Padlet where you can put those responses in and you can have those for ongoing access, and we'll have those sorted by subtopics. Okay, Zach.
Great. Thanks so much, Brett. And thanks to all of you for showing up and showing some enthusiasm for this topic. Nick and I aren't always on the same page with this stuff, but we're both excited and interested. Now, a lot of you have some exposure, maybe even some confusion about ChatGPT, and we're going to hear, first thing we're going to tell you is that is not your fault. The predominant framing of ChatGPT by mainstream news outlets has been either dismissive, like it's Dogecoin, something that you can just ignore and it's going to go away in 6 months, doesn't matter, nobody cares about it, or it is Skynet, meaning that it is the omnipotent AI presence from the Terminator franchise that will end humanity almost immediately. It is neither one of those things. And another reason why you might be confused is that there are new news stories about this literally every day and in every genre. An early commitment that Nick and I made was to stay in our lane in terms of trying to understand some of the potentials of AI broadly, but ChatGPT in particular in relation to higher education. So now that we've talked about what it's not, which it's not something that we can just ignore and it's going to go away, and it's not the immediate end to civilization, I'm going to hand it over to Nick to get into some more specifics about what it is not and what it is.
Thanks, Zach, and hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I think it's really important to start off of what Zach just mentioned about the threats of AI. And what ChatGPT is not, first and foremost, is that hypothetical general AI. A general AI would be a computer system that can perform independent tasks that match or exceed animals or humans, including learning unfamiliar tasks and sort of developing as an independent sentient being. ChatGPT is not that. So that's the first place to recognize what it is and what it's not. The second one is that it is not sentient or self-aware. Now, what's really interesting is when we get into showing ChatGPT in action is that because it's set up in a conversational manner, it is quite easy to start thinking that there is a there, that is a thinking, rational sort of planning being behind it. But when I get into what it is, we'll see that that's not quite the case, and that there's a lot of things that can kind of trick humans into thinking that there's actually a sentient being behind it. Now, more practical, there's some interesting developments now about ChatGPT and its potential replacement for search, and Google in particular. Now, most of us for the last 20 plus years have been using Google when we go to the internet to find information, to learn about new things. And there's certainly a way that ChatGPT and other sort of chat AIs could eventually take the place of that. Now, Google, as you probably know, has recently been doing more with when you search in to ask a question about something you're interested in, instead of just giving you a list of web pages, it'll kind of highlight what it thinks, its algorithm thinks is sort of like the best answer. And you don't even have to click on a website, you can just see it in there. And we'll talk a little bit later about some advancements with ChatGPT and Microsoft in search. But right now, it's a little bit different. So we don't see it as a complete search replacement for search. Now, and down the line, it could be interesting if ChatGPT and other AIs sort of are integrated into academic databases, where this could be a pretty powerful research tool if it gets things right. The next one is, as Zach mentioned, this is not a novelty, such as an NFT or other kind of cryptocurrencies and virtual commodities. We don't think that this is going away. In fact, the reason that we're not 100% confident, right, of course, but there's people using this right now. And by I mean people, I mean everyday people. My wife just used it yesterday for the first time to write a poem about our daughter, right? And so there's people finding a use value, a usefulness of this technology right now. And I think that that's going to continue to be the case, and we'll see this sticking around. And so that really gets us into one of the things that we thought early on, is that this is not something that we can just wish will go away and hope that in 6 months this fad will be over and we can return to the world in which we inhabited, 8 months ago. And that does not seem to be the case. And so that means we have to adjust and have to learn and kind of embrace, in a way, this new technological world that we're entering. So now let me turn to what ChatGPT is. This term has entered the lexicon just recently, but it was a little slow at first to people to, you kind of mix up the letters, and it's not a very elegant name like, Siri or Alexa. And yet at the same time, it's showing to be quite powerful. So let's start with the GPT part. This stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. That's a big mouthful. So let's break that down into 3 important terms that we should become familiarized with, and you'll see them in articles and so on and so forth. The first one is machine learning. So GPT is a machine learning, which is a computer algorithm that uses data to learn and improve its capabilities on a certain set of tasks. Many of you are actually already using a machine learning tool, whether you know it or not. If you have an iPhone, for 4 or 5 years now, Apple has been embedding with their silicon, their chip inside the iPhone, what they call the neural engine. The neural engine is a machine learning chip that performs all sorts of tasks for you very quickly in the background. So if you use Apple iPhone and you use the photo app, and let's say you have 20,000 pictures and you want to find a picture of a dog, if you type in dog in search in Apple Photos, Apple's machine learning neural engine has been trained to pattern recognize images that have a high probability of containing a dog. And so it'll give you results that it thinks contain dogs. And lo and behold, most of the time it's really accurate. It'll give you your pictures of your puppy or other dogs that are in there. If you use Google phone or Android phones, Google is doing this in the cloud. They've trained their machine learning on photos to detect it on the server, whereas Apple does it on device. So that's machine learning. So ChatGPT is a form of machine learning. Now, it's a particular kind of machine learning. It's a large language model. So you'll see this LLM when people use that. They don't often define it. That large language model is using that machine learning on a huge data set of words that is going to help to train the algorithm to understand, summarize, generate, and predict new content. It does that by word probability associations. It gets trained on human language about what should follow next in a sentence or a thought. And then it can develop and learn and start capabilities of producing its own answers to it. Now, there's other ways that this is happening. So OpenAI, who owns ChatGPT and develops it, also has a property called DALL-E that you might be familiar with. So if there's anyone out there that's in art or humanities and doing art, DALL-E, and then there's another one called Stable Diffusion. These are trained on artwork taken from the internet. And these systems, instead of producing text, can produce novel pictures, graphics, paintings, and so on and so forth, all digital, of course. So that's a large language model. And the last one is the neural network. So neural networks are hard to understand, and I'm not a computer scientist, but they're computing systems modeled after the human brain. Rather than a sort of binary, thinking about your computer, you double click on an icon and it opens up, and you gave the computer an instruction, a very specific instruction, and it executes it. A neural network begins to develop and learn and grow independent of the human input into it. And so it can then it's the part that helps the system learn. So ChatGPT is one of these kinds of systems, and it was trained on text from the internet up until 2021. That's pretty important to remember if you're using it, because it means that the data that it has is now approaching 2 years old. Remarkably, it was trained on 300 billion words. Now, not the open internet. They didn't just plug it into the internet and open it up and say, go for it. They trained it on specific slices and packages and texts and words from the internet that the designers chose. To do this, they used the computing power of over 100,000 MacBook Pro M1 silicon chip. So it's an NVIDIA GPU, which is a graphics card. So imagine a warehouse full of the computing power of over 100,000 MacBook Pros that is required to train this model. All right, so let's get to the chat part. So part of the advancement here with ChatGPT is combining the GPT with the chat and making it into something that humans find value and can recognize its potential. And this is where they use the neural network to create the probabilistic reasoning. When you give it a question or ask it to do something, it will build a response that is human-like. So it is human-like in its text output, and it's human-like in its response to you. And that's where it breaks that barrier between machine and human, so that people feel comfortable using it and asking it all sorts of questions. And what it outputs is generally compelling information. We find it compelling. Oh, this seems plausible. This sounds like something Zach would tell me or somebody else would tell me. Now, it also does that in compelling writing with good syntax, grammar, and style. And these are sort of important advances where this is where people are finding this to be a useful tool, because it gives them a compelling information, compelling way it's said, and in a style that seems familiar, like you're talking to your friend and asking for advice or a question. All right, Doc, take it away.
Sure. So thank you, Nick, for giving us that overview. We want to do some show, not just tell. And so I'm going to drag over the ChatGPT interface, and then we have some specific prompts that we're going to run through to sort of demonstrate how it works. Now, I would imagine that a lot of you have already tried this out, and probably some of you haven't. So as Brett mentioned, my background is in communication studies. A big part of my work is teaching public speaking. Now, we don't require full prose from the students, rather we require outlines. So one of the things that I've asked this to do is to provide an informative speech outline using APA citations on the benefit of a vegetarian diet. Now you can see that this produced an extensive outline with all of the things that we would require our students to do, including an attention getter, a well-organized and an outlined speech summary, and then with citations down at the bottom. Now, one of the things Nick said is that this is conversational. So one of the things that you can ask it to do is, you can say, I forgot, please include in text citation. And then it does that. One thing to keep in mind is this is only version 3.5. Now I'm paying for a premium account right now, which gives me better access, and it means that I can use version 4.0, which is a lot more powerful than this is. If you scroll up to the top and we start a new chat, you can see up here, there are different models that you can interact with. This is the default. Everyone, including everyone on this webinar, has access to 3.5. 4.0 is the one that you pay for. It's slower. We're just going to be working in 3.5 today, unless there's the will of the masses want to see something that it does within 4.0. But you can see that even the 3.5 version is incredibly powerful at producing stuff that would be some of the best work in the class if someone turned this in my introduction to public speaking class. So we also have a prompt here from Nick. Oh, you know what? Before I go on, I'm excited about this. And like I said, my background is in communication. In public speaking, a lot of what we do is grounded in Cicero's rhetorical canon that sort of outlines the 5 components of effective speaking. And there have been disruptions to that over time, right? Note cards and teleprompters have disrupted what we think about memory. I am thinking about ChatGPT as a disruption to what we have thought about in terms of invention. That's in some ways hard to stomach, because that is the thing that we emphasize, that we really like our students to dig into. But I also have to be realistic. That disruption is here. And so maybe I just think about this as an invention machine. Now, that's not a perfect analogy, and there are going to be problems along the way, but there's real potential and opportunity here. Okay. I'm gonna turn this over to Nick. Oh, you know what? There's something in the chat I want to address real quickly. Yeah, the citations on this are, there are problems sometimes with the citations, and ChatGPT can make stuff up, including some citations. The hang up is, in a general education class, I'm not an area expert on what makes a vegetarian diet. I'm not looking up all these would require me to actually go in and look up each individual source in order to verify it. Now, if this was something where I'm an area expert, not the case, but in a general education class, disciplinary expertise isn't there in the same way it is in other spots. Now, I am gonna pop something in here for Nick with disciplinary expertise. So as Brett mentioned, Nick is a professor in sociology. Nick, do you want to tell them about this prompt and what that means?
Yeah, why don't you click it there? And all right, so in sociology, there's a foundational concept here from C. Wright Mills called the sociological imagination. And this is, like I said, a foundational concept. And a prompt that we often give our students is to read C. Wright Mills's famous book, The Sociological Imagination, and then produce their own way of defining it using the text. So they have to repackage it, reword it into their own words to explain the concept. This is kind of a very foundational way that social scientists, kind of look for and assess proficiency and knowledge and concepts and demonstrate using concepts and applying them. And so when I first did this, almost 6 months ago now, it blew me away, because this is a response and an answer that is essentially as good or better than I could even give, and certainly higher accuracy than my students who would struggle reading through the text. And I think this example here really it emphasizes the disruptive potential of ChatGPT for particular kinds of things we do in higher education, and such my field of sociology, which we are really kind of teaching them to think and write and use concepts and apply them. And I don't see any easy answer here. I think part of this has made me really rethink whether this is a kind of exercise I would give my students, to have them read the text and then on their own come up with a definition based on the text. Certainly it calls into question whether that they would just rather turn to the ChatGPT to do it. For example, you can also then follow up here and ask ChatGPT to give you examples. And that's where students often struggle. They might be able to get the concept, but then I say, okay, then let's find some examples in our own time right now, in 2023, where we could use the sociological imagination to make insight into the relationship between social forces and structures and individual experiences in the world. And so this really, I don't see a clear path forward. And I think that individual faculty and those working in curriculum development are really going to have to think about how this fits into their model and pedagogy of learning concepts and applying them.
Thanks, Nick. We are going to get to some big picture takeaways for both teaching and for administrators a little bit later. Right now, while we have this open, we wanted to highlight something that this is excellent at, and that's adjusting for style. So we can tell it, make this sound more academic, and it changes some of the wording along the way to make it sound more like something that Nick would write and send to me. And then we can also say, now write it for a third grader. Nick's daughter is just leaving third grade, mine is about to enter it. And so then you can ask it to adjust the style, and it does so. Again, it's not always perfect, but it is an incredibly powerful generator. Now, I know there was some activity in the chat about some of the citations and the pieces earlier and about checking. And I have to say, that's a part that I have tried to lean into in some of my more content-heavy courses, like, for instance, in freedom of speech. I have an assignment of Quick Write where they are required to go use ChatGPT and then edit and check the material that's in it. And now, again, that's an area where I have some expertise, so I can look at what the students did and look at what ChatGPT did, see some shortcomings, and try and help them along the way. That's a possible path forward. Again, it's not without its perils, but there is a possible path forward. Now, a lot of folks are interested in the tools that we might use to check whether or not students have been using ChatGPT. And one of the first ones that rolled out was an integration through Turnitin. So as an experiment, I ran through several outlines in Turnitin. So I'm going to pull up a screenshot of the interface. So I asked ChatGPT 3.5 to produce an informative speech outline about the life and work of theorist and literary critic James Baldwin. It did so, similar to the vegetarian diet one that we did earlier, and Turnitin correctly assessed that 100% of this was written by AI. You'll note the text that is highlighted, that's the text that they think is AI driven, and the percentage mark up in the upper right this is important to note, that is a percentage of the text they believe it was written by AI. That is not a percentage of confidence that they have in their assessment. Now, interestingly, I gave ChatGPT 4.0 the exact same prompt. It produced an outline, and that outline, the Turnitin only thinks is 22% written by AI. In fact, just really the introduction and part of the closing. This is a pretty regular pattern with this particular detection tool. A similar experiment on the vegetarian diet piece returned 50% for 3.5 and only 15% for 4.0. That said, when I prompted it for a speech about investing, it returned 100% match for both the 3.5 and 4.0 version. I think that what we're seeing right now is a validation of something that Nick and I initially theorized, which is that if you're interested in preventing students from using ChatGPT to do their work, what we are in is in an arms race where the detection tools will continue to improve and the text generation functions will continue to diversify and improve themselves. And that leaves us as faculty in a difficult position of not always knowing whether students are using it and whether our detection tools are good or not. One of the things that's true about Turnitin, and I believe is also true about ChatGPT 0, is that these are black box technologies, meaning that there's an algorithm inside and we don't know how it's working. It's not like the Turnitin tool where it checks it against existing text and then you can see the exact match between the existing text. It's just faith in the algorithm. One of the interesting things about ChatGPT as well is that it produces different responses for almost every time you enter something. So we could, and Nick and I probably asked it that sociological imagination question. Nick, what do you think? 15 times? Mm-hmm. And we've received different answers almost every time. So it's, as Nick said in the description, it's an evolving piece. Okay. So we wanted to have a look real quickly while we have this up as some other usage. So Nick recently had to write a letter of recommendation, as almost all of us do. And so we entered, I didn't get the whole thing. No, letters of recommendation tend to be kind of formulaic anyway, and so we thought this would be a good test case. And so we gave it some This gets back to the conversational pieces that Nick talked about earlier. So we gave it some sort of natural language, like here's a student, I'm writing a letter of rec, here's some information about the student and about me. And then it produces a letter of rec, which from where I sit, and I read lots of letters of rec as well as writing them, is nearly indistinguishable from most of the stuff that we produce and that we look at. And again, the conversational element and the natural language element here, it really does work in chat. So we could say, I forgot to mention that this is a working student, and that means that she hasn't been very involved in extracurricular activities. And it goes through and rewrites and immediately incorporates that information with its existing letter. And one more use case. So we picked on Nick's college, and his dean really is named Eddie Vela. And so this is based on something that happens in almost all of our campuses with the reminders from administrators in sort of formulaic, but sometimes kind of scripted but personalized email. And so this is a draft email that it produces almost instantaneously for reminding people to keep their offices open till 5, even as the semester draws to a close. So those are real life uses that might make some of our lives a lot easier, and also introduce some ethical quandaries in the immediate. For some big picture takeaways, I'm going to turn it back over to Nick to talk about some of the teaching implications.
All right,
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. We're doing what's next.
Yeah, so let's just give a little update. So some of those of you who don't follow this closely, it changes every day. And Zach and I basically are reading the news every day and trying to figure out all the new things happening. Some of these are new and some of them aren't. So the first one that happened a number of months ago is that Microsoft Corporation made a gigantic investment into OpenAI. And they've basically formed a partnership through investment. And this has led, Microsoft has now integrated ChatGPT into Microsoft Bing search. Bing only has like 4 or 5% market share of search, but Microsoft wants to grow that and give a new value add. So they partnered here to integrate into their search engine the ChatGPT function. Now this kind of went wild when people first started using it, because ChatGPT had more access to the open internet and real-time kind of information. But it's, I think, a big play here around the future of search. I think more important for us in academia is going to be Microsoft has stated that they plan to integrate ChatGPT into Office 365. This has huge implications for us as faculty, administrators, staff, and our students. At some point, let's say in the fall, if you open up Office 365 and you open up Word, and all of a sudden it says, hi, I'm ChatGPT and I'd like to help you. And you're able, or a student is able to just start using ChatGPT inside their Word document. This is a major game changer around both what we can do with it, but also the negative sides of plagiarism, academic dishonesty, and the questions there about doing your own work. So I think that this is something to watch for. Somewhat excitingly is that OpenAI also a few months ago launched plugin partnerships. This would be to partner with particular organizations or corporations to kind of wall off a data set, say Expedia.com. So if you plug ChatGPT into the databases of Expedia.com around hotel, flight, car, vacation planning, and then you just had a conversation with ChatGPT to plan your next vacation, this, we could see the real world application for that. What we're kind of interested in is, like, imagine down the line that ChatGPT has, or similar, has hooks into academic databases. And we could sit down when we're writing an article and use the conversational methodology here to find and source actual citations, references, and papers and summaries, and begin to use that as a research tool. Zach, you take the next one.
Yeah, I'm keeping a special eye on this one. I'm really interested. There are also, ChatGPT is obviously not the only game in town. There are new bots that are popping up all the time. And some of the more interesting ones are for specialty markets. Like there was a concern among conservatives in the United States that ChatGPT was too woke. And so there are emergent chatbots that give politically infused answers to your liking, so that you can basically go choose a chat bot that aligns with your politics in order to get the answers that you like and feel more comfortable. And there are also bots that are popping up that are sort of native to particular languages and regions. I heard in a podcast there are two sort of Russia specific and Russian language oriented chatbots that are being launched in the next couple of months. So yeah, there are these sort of spin-off pieces all the time. And once again, that sort of loops back into some of the difficulty that we might have trying to rein this in, because the algorithms that we might be using to detect language are probably ChatGPT specific. And so with these specialty bots, I don't always know what to do about that. Go ahead, Nick.
Thanks. Yeah, and so a few more here. More recently, OpenAI has launched sort of APIs or development tools for app developers. So if the old way, 6 months ago, you had to go to OpenAI and access and use ChatGPT through their web interface. But now you can get apps on your phone. You can get clients that are that'll do this for you on your phone, your computer. Also, there's even a watch app for people who have Apple Watch. So I think this is going to expand the users and the way that people can access this and have this grow. If you can just look at your wrist and interface with ChatGPT, that's a whole different kind of experience than logging into OpenAI and going to a web browser on a desktop or something. So that's a space to watch or even get involved in. And lastly, Google, of course, and others are developing their own competitors. Google has opened up in beta, I believe, Bard, which is a large language model, a direct competitor to ChatGPT and OpenAI. So we're obviously going to enter eventually an arms race also between giant tech companies with competing AI tools, and that has the potential to kind of shake out implications for higher education and teaching and learning. So let's pivot now to the impacts. And I see in the chat there's lots of opinions between people who are finding value in using it in particularly interesting ways that I'm actually learning from, and of course people who are very concerned about this. And the very first one, of course, is to be concerned about is academic honesty. I think there is a high value use case for students who are struggling, time crunched, putting things off, whatever it may be. There's all different reasons people decide to not do their own work. And I think that something like ChatGPT just makes it even easier than it ever had been. And my students, I found using the Turnitin, there are students who have high probability that are using this. And so I think it is a conversation that faculty need to have with themselves about how you want to approach this from an individual instructor, all the way to departments thinking about how they want to handle this as a collective. And then also, bringing that all the way up to administration and academic integrity, policies, and offices. So related to this, Zach and I early had theorized that there could be implications for grade equity. By that we mean that if some students hold themselves to a standard, an ethical standard that says, I won't use these tools, I will do my own work. And other students who make different choices, and when they submit them, a student who's struggling but does their own work might receive, let's say, a C on an assignment. And a student who, for whatever reason, decided to use ChatGPT might receive an A. And that inadvertently, we're sort of punishing not using these tools. And I think that from a student's perspective, could look like an enticing reason why you should be using this if others aren't. Again, it's in some of that arms race mentality that we can get into, where if you see someone getting ahead, then you might want to also use the tool that gets people ahead. And so that's something that we're going to have to figure out as faculty and administrators and staff, as well as an institution. A huge impact here is going to be writing for competency. A core aspect of university, the existence of the university, is to develop and train students in writing competency. And I think this, is, as you can imagine, is a direct disruption to those endeavors. If students can just have this, write it better than them, and finding the value in struggling to learn to write makes it a harder proposition. So I think that writing English departments and GE writing curriculum development is going to really have to sit down and think about this and be open-eyed to ChatGPT and its potential disruption in that way. And then for social science and others who write to demonstrate knowledge, as I've already mentioned earlier, this is also a disruption for that, because students struggle in understanding theory and concepts and translating that into written words that then also attach to application about how we understand the world and make sense of it through theory and concepts. I think ChatGPT is poised to also disrupt the models in which we assess that or make assignments around that. And so that's another area to really focus in on. Zach, you want to take that last one there?
Yeah, and perfect timing. Our neighborhood train's rolling by right now, so enjoy that, everyone. So the last point that we want to make here on teaching is there is a real question here about equity, accessibility, and affordability. So as we mentioned, I'm paying for premium access. That's $20 a month. That's well within the realm for some people, and it is not for others. So we already see a sort of tiered issue in terms of the reliability of access and how powerful the tools are that you have access to. But there are other issues here as well. So in our section of California where Nick and I live, there are lots of rural communities without access to a lot of resources. ChatGPT and other AI programs now give people access to information that would have formerly been behind a paywall. And because it has access to different databases, different information, and it can summarize that sometimes accurately, sometimes inaccurately. But if you imagine a student in a rural community without very many resources, maybe without a local library that's interested in astrophysics, right? Like, this is probably the most powerful tool that they have for getting answers to particular questions and maybe sparking their curiosity. So there are ways that it makes teaching and learning less equitable, and there are also ways that this might potentially even the playing field for students that have been in resource poor areas for a long time. I know that a lot of you are here as administrators. Everyone works with administrators, and so we also want to take a moment to highlight a few administrative impacts. Related to Nick's questions about writing, there are big picture questions here that we have to start asking now about why we are doing what we are doing, right? Like, lots of us assign writing and don't always know why, but this is a big picture question for universities to answer. Are we preparing students for the workforce? Are we preparing students to be citizens of the world? Does that look the same way that it did 6 months ago? I certainly don't think so. But it's going to cause us to need to return to first principles and possibly reinvent what we do as institutions, knowing that this powerful tool is already being used out in the private and public sector, and that students are likely already using it as well. There are also big picture questions about the nature of assessment. So if a good chunk of students are using ChatGPT in their classes, are we assessing student learning when we are assessing across programs and courses, or are we assessing their proficiency with using artificial intelligence? There are questions that are starting to get raised about retention, tenure, and promotion and application. Nick and I noticed that several publication outlets and journals have already started to publish specific guidelines in terms of we do or do not accept material that was written with the power of artificial intelligence. So if you're an administrator looking at 2 tenure files, let's say mine, where I made extensive use of AI and have a long publication record, and Nick, whose publication record is not as long, but he did all of his work himself, how do you evaluate those things against each other? It's a new world for those sort of pieces, and we will see those implications play out dramatically over the next couple of years. There's also potential work that can be done in advising. I know right now I'm working on a early warning system in some of my classes, and there's real potential here for artificial intelligence to both identify students who are struggling and then to help craft specific messages that lessen the burden on faculty and staff that are trying to outreach to struggling students. Lastly, there's a conversation that needs to happen that's also been going on in the chat about whether these questions about usage and academic honesty are top down or bottom up. I don't have a strong opinion about this, but I think that this is not something that we can just let happen. Whether you are an administrator with purview over a unit or a campus, or you're a faculty member, it needs to be an intentional decision about what it is that we're doing. Are we going to go with this sort of individually by our own in a sort of marketplace, or are we going to have a centralized vision? If so, who has input on that? Is it just administrators, or is it also faculty and students? And lastly, this question of letters of recommendation and report writing. You saw the power and the speed with which it produced a perfectly passable letter of recommendation. I think that there's also that potential there for inserting some specifics and help it outputting reports, whether they have to do with assessment, retention, tenure, and promotion, or a report that you are drafting about any individual unit or faculty member. So there are lots of big picture implications. Nick and I didn't come to you today with a list of here are the things that you need to do, more so with a realization that this is a massive disruptor, that we cannot ignore it, and that it implicates every level of what we do at the university. I'm going to hand it back over to Brett, who is going to handle the next section. Thank you everyone so much for your time. Nick and I will try and respond to some things in the chat and in the Padlet that Brett is going to share soon.
Okay, so what we want to do, jump into the slideshow here, is there has been an incredible amount of sharing in the chat, and I really appreciate that. And there have been requests for us sending in the chat, so we will do that. And I thought you would be able to save the chat, but it's maybe not a function that everybody has as far as that save chat function from the chat box. So if that's the case, worry not, we will send it to you later this week for sure. We'll send out the recording, the slides, and the chat for you. But what we want to do is now take some of the dialogue that we've had in chat and now move it into a different format. And let's look at a Padlet here. And we have that, yes, in the chat as well. So join us in the Padlet. And if you haven't done this before, I'll just describe briefly, pretty straightforward. You'll see a series of prompts across the top. And so looking at ChatGPT in higher education, what are your thoughts on the following categories? Teaching, learning, assessment. Those don't necessarily reside in silos, but for each of those, what are some thoughts that you have related to ChatGPT? Toward the positive, toward the excitement, toward the must do, or things that you're concerned about. Also ethics, equity, and anything else you have over on the right-hand column could be kind of a miscellaneous. So challenging to share written assignments, okay. Great. Reflective learning can be reduced, yeah. Depends on how you frame it and what you have students do with the output. It could be increased because they may need to reflect more and create more ownership of the content output. And then to maybe put it into, Zach's early on example of here, it can create an outline for a speech, but they've still got to synthesize it and deliver it and understand. So they've still got to take it up those levels of blooms. But it's all a matter of how you design the assignment and what the assessment's going to be, the outcome's going to be. We'll get a lot of these loaded here and I'll scan them quickly, won't reply to all of them, so my apologies. The reason why we do something like this is to get some of your comments in the moment and share that across the community, but also that link that's in the chat, you'll be able to go back to this anytime. So if you find some great prompts for you to use individually, or let's say you're a faculty developer at your campus, these are things you can bring into your local conversation through either the deck or the Padlet that we have here. Let's see. For teachers generating multiple choice questions, you can develop those much more rapidly. Obviously, you can check those, do a quality control check on those. But yes, you can definitely pump out some formative assessments very quickly. And those can be larger exams, or they can be smaller, more frequent formative assessments. And I'll show some examples of prompts here on a resource I developed in just a few slides. Let's see, accessibility. It could be accessibility because of affordability, or we also always have to be mindful of accessibility for individuals with disabilities. So it does level the playing field in many ways, providing access to so much knowledge and content and learning, but there can be that little bit of divide factor if there's that cost between a 3.5 and a 4.0 as one example. New process for admissions, good point there. Yeah, so how to scan those application letters more closely or in a different way. And to be honest, people are using AI to scan application letters for admissions to institutions, for job applications. There's a lot of AI being used. There's bias built into that in some ways, so we have to be very careful and be aware of that. So that's another conversation as well. Okay, let's see. Makes great starter rubrics. I have found that to be true, except in one case. I did a prompt recently where I was presenting it to a medical university and said, you know, watch live how I can ask it to create a case study assignment for a nursing course. It did an amazing job, and everybody just was blown away by how effectively it created that assignment. Except when it got to the rubric, it was actually, it said rubric, and then it said introduction, 10 points, discussion, 20 points. It wasn't a rubric, it was just a grading scale. So there is a difference. So it does have a shortcoming sometimes, but if you explicitly say, develop me a rubric with this amount of scale and categories, then it can do that effectively. So again, it's the prompting that sometimes will be the difference. Many times will be the difference. Some kudos there in the equity column for Zach's points, great. There's a lot here. This is great. I'm going to move us forward here in just a moment. We're already just a few minutes from the hour, so I'm going to do that right now. You'll have ongoing access to this. So thank you. And let me get back into the slides and talk a little bit more about other developments, related developments and beyond. So let's do the poll very quickly here, Kelly. How likely are you to use ChatGPT as part of your fall prep, regardless of your role? All right, and we'll do this very quickly. So apologies if I cut you off. So very likely, somewhat unlikely, or very unlikely. Let's run that for about 10 more seconds here. And let's look at the results. Okay, those should be coming up. Okay. So on the likely to very likely, we've got 87%. Yeah, no surprise. It's a big part of reality. So with that summer window, we know we don't want people off contract to have to work much, but you know, hopefully you're able to sprinkle in some learnings there and you know, and see that as something that's actually enjoyable, that discovery, and keeping it light, but also kind of progressing a little bit. And then about 13% that are on the unlikely side. And different reasons for that, of course, we won't get into necessarily, but it just depends on your role in reality. A quick plug here, if you wanted to follow Zach and Nick's writings that they do frequently, then we've got a link to their blog, meltsintoair.org, and specifically /ChatGPT on that.
Just so people know that my name is Janos, A and O switched. Didn't catch that. So if you Google for me or whatever, yeah, you'll find that.
That could have been me. Sorry about that. So some further discovery through alchemy and what we're offering specifically. So I created this week, getting excited about this topic, I created just a range of prompts here. You saw the live demonstration, and here's a list of some prompts here that you can use for different tasks that you would do, let's say, as an instructor, or that you might have students do down toward the bottom. So we've got that link available coming to you in the chat. or you can QR code it if you're quick, because I'm moving on. But we have more coming soon, because we have these teaching optimizers we've developed, which are tools, templates, and wizards that instructors can use to develop resources fairly quickly and get to the resources they need to implement without having to start at the beginning. And within 5 to 10 minutes, they can develop these resources. And again, all based on learning science. We're now starting to integrate generative AI into that process. So it's going to be much deeper as far as what it'll be able to gather for them and develop for them and personalize that to their situation. Very rapid development, and we'll be able to roll those out increasingly to instructors. So we'll keep you posted on that. We're excited, very much so. We also work with campus teams to help elevate their efforts that they're doing. There's great people doing teaching and learning efforts, teaching and learning centers. We work with a lot of those centers to really elevate the amount of work that they can do and the type of work that they can do to broaden that and optimize that. We engage faculty and we help to build community. We have a great platform called Curie that we'll be announcing more about in the near future, where we help faculty to go in and do good work and develop these resources and actually have portfolios to show what they've developed and what they're implementing and the progress that they're making, but also be able to share with others resources and collections. And then that helps to build evidence, which is always critical on professional learning for, let's say, the faculty, but also the impact on student. So we have a QR for you and also a link going into chat where you can learn more about that. And we'll keep you posted. If you like to follow podcasts, we've launched this Change Makers in Higher Ed podcast, and I am wrapping up, by the way. We have that on Apple and Spotify. We started off with looking at the future of higher ed, very big, broad topic, but certainly very, very relevant with where we are. We've also been looking at metaverse. We've also talked about what's quad to cloud and the changing concept of the campus or the institution, if you will. So we've got a few of those already going and doing those at about a monthly flip. We have an event called the Online Learning Consortium Foundry Day, focusing on breaking the cycle of burnout and charting a path forward for the future. So that's a free event taking place on the 15th and 16th, several sessions across those 2 days. So feel free to join there and also grab the link from the chat. And a couple of us from Alchemy will be facilitating with Online Learning Consortium. And if any of you happen to be going to the Lilia conference, amazing event, May 22nd through 24th, would love to meet up with you there. Just let me know. All right. You can certainly follow us on all the different types of social media. We've got those available for you. And then last is thank you so much for your time and contributions. Especially Zach and Nick, Janos, not Jonas, for your time, both of you, and making this a very engaging session, and participants for all of your knowledge and contributions and keeping things so lively. Really appreciate that. And there's our website for further information. Hope you have a great day and time leading into summer. Thank you, everybody.